I'm really excited about being here, so thank you all for coming out and joining me for your lunch. I hope just to talk to you for a little bit about the book and the lessons that I've learned along the way, but frankly to engage you in some conversation and dialogue and questions as well. So be sure to pay attention. There's a quiz at the end, and not only is there a quiz, I hope to have a conversation and discussion. So as Michelle said, I wrote the book because a couple of years ago we were coming upon our 15th birthday as an organization. And as we are approaching the 15th birthday and looking at our long-term strategy, we really wanted to say, how could we use this year to change the narrative about why our work mattered and why play was actually worth saving? And so doing so, a couple of years ago, we started to put our words down on paper, and it ended up being in this book. And more so than just being about a movement to save play, we wanted to talk about the individuals along the way. Actually moms and dads and grandparents and brothers and sisters that for some reason became compelled and passionate about this, and that went from an individual purpose to kind of this collective cause. And that's what we talk about in the book. And I wouldn't have been honest if I wrote this book and didn't share my personal story. And my personal story goes as, when I was 4 years old, my father left my mother after the birth of my younger sister, and there were 8 of us total. And he was a cross-country truck driver, and he left to unload a truck one day and actually never came back. And my mother cared for us for as long as she could, but had a nervous breakdown, and we essentially were becoming wards of the court in Idaho, Jerome, Idaho. And fortunately, there was this place outside of Chicago called Mooseheart, the Child City. And it was made up of the men and women of the Moose Lodges across the country. That was an orphanage when it started in 1888. And by 1976, it essentially became a community for needy families and needy kids. So my mom and I and all of our siblings were actually able to go there. So from 4 to 18, I spent my childhood living at this group home. And it was an interesting experience looking back on it because I didn't realize how fortunate that I was. And I can distinctly remember, frankly, that as the other schools that we were playing in football, as the smallest school that had and fielded a competitive football team, were consolidating, we never consolidated. And we actually almost every year got new uniforms. And when other schools' band was being eliminated or art program teacher was being laid off, our band program never got cut, and our art teacher was always there. And so both now and looking back, I realized how fortunate I was in my experience of having so many other people mentor and give of their time and, frankly, dollars to raise me and my family. I think 2 other lessons that I learned at a young age that I write about in the book comes from the football field. One of them comes from the football field, and it talks about, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And to me, that's really important in running an organization, and frankly, a model as we talk about ourselves and our community. And what I meant by that was having only 100 people in the whole high school, yet fielding a football team was pretty mighty. And our coaches at the end of every practice would make us run 4 perfect offensive plays. And most times you ran both the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball, so you were pretty tired. And their purpose was that it wasn't your all-time best once that mattered. It was a level of consistency doing it over and over and over. And frankly, as I became an adult and as I run an organization, I sometimes wonder and worry about people focusing on their one-time best than being able to do that one-time best over and over and over. And I see people putting, kind of effort into practice, but it's lousy practice. And I learned that both on the football field and tried to translate that to everything that I did. The other lesson that I learned is that when better is expected, good is not enough. When better is expected, good is not enough. And part of the purpose of that is that many times you're the only one who knows the difference. You as an individual are the only one who knows your difference. All those Moose members across the country who were giving of their time expected something of me. But what did I expect of myself? Now, this all goes forward because having graduated from high school at 18, dropping out of college at 21, and going to work for a national service organization to organize volunteers. Because what I felt like I was good at was organizing people around definable projects on definable timelines. And I went to Columbus, Ohio, and participated in 2 playground builds. And the playgrounds were amazing, but they were frankly much more interested in the cool one-of-a-kind designed playground than it was the process by which you got there. So I was asked to move to Washington, D.C. I was organizing another service conference, and lo and behold, a newspaper article comes out in the Washington Post in 1995 about 2 young kids, 2 and 4, brother and sister, Aisha and Clarendon. And they had suffocated by crawling into an abandoned car in the heat wave that struck across the country that year, killing hundreds, and died. And this Washington Post reporter went down to the community to investigate. And she started to walk around the community. And she just kept walking around the community in larger and larger circles. And she went within 3 miles to find a patch of grass, no swimming pool, no athletic fields, and certainly no playground. And she wrote this front page article in the Washington Post about how Aisha and Clarendon had no place to play. And I was organizing a playground project. And from my experience as a youth, people participated in my life. Now, although that's a tragic circumstance, these kids' deaths, we all know kids who grow up in tough situations and tough communities. And I wanted to do something about that and bring purpose to our work. So I set out on this journey to organize people around this common cause, that play was not a luxury, but an absolute necessity. To do it in a process that would build social capital, that would build trust and relationships with each other. And we call it achievable wins. And that after having an achievable win, you may go from participating in the playground project to be more engaged and involved in your community. And so some examples, much like my story, some examples I use to illustrate that is one of the first projects I got to work on outside of Washington, D.C. was in San Antonio, Texas, with Ray Hood, who was 72 years old when I first met her. And she lived in the Coliseum Oaks neighborhood, and it was an all-black neighborhood, and then the wealthy neighborhood was right next to it, separated by a train track. And the playground was on this side of the tracks. And the kids from her community would go over there and use the playground and use the swimming pool and use the basketball courts. And they erected a 15-foot fence that stopped the kids from coming over. And she tried to stop them before doing that and was unsuccessful. And she found out about us, asked us to come down there to work with her in the way that we work, which was not just give a playground, but actually invest in the process of designing and fundraising and building the playground. And we built a playground for the kids of Coliseum Oaks right on the other side of the track. And she said success to her was that the kids now from that side came to her playground. The amazing part about it for me, though, was that before she passed 8 years later, she built 6 more playgrounds in San Antonio without Daryl and without Kaboom. She found this kind of spark, and it lit a fire that caught on. Or I think about Juanita Hatton in Nicetown, Philadelphia, that I also had the opportunity to work with years ago. And she built this playground that Colin Powell came to help volunteer on, that Vice President Gore and his wife Tipper came to volunteer on, and it was an amazing day. A couple of weeks after it was built, she went across the street, as she did every morning since it had been done, and found that there was graffiti on the playground. And she was angry and disappointed, and she didn't know what to do. She walked back across the street. She called in sick as an hourly employee. And she decided to scrub the graffiti off the playground because, as she told me then, she didn't want the kids to come home from school and see the graffiti on the playground that these volunteers, their parents, and the community built for them. Unfortunately, this story repeated itself several times over the next couple of months. It was graffitied. She would wake up as she did every morning. She would go check in the park. If she saw it graffitied, she'd walk back across the street, call in sick, giving up money as part of her livelihood to scrub the graffiti off because she didn't want the kids to see graffiti on the playground that the volunteers built. She got word out in the community that she would outlast them. And sure enough, when I was there in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago, it had been almost 12 years since the last graffiti incident, and not once since. And the playground still literally looks brand new. The point I think I get out of that is that both the playground is a great place for the kids to play and for the community to congregate. But the process of what it did for Juanita was gave her this civic voice and this almost obligation to continue to be the fire and the light and the beacon in this community, where still a lot of kids are growing up under tough circumstances. Or Wanda Cheeks in Spartansburg, South Carolina, who, when she was a young girl, was abused in a park at a very young age. And it sent her on a downward spiral trajectory. Her family moved her away. She went through foster care after foster care. She was in trouble, juvenile detention. And as an adult, though, she came back to Spartansburg because the community hadn't changed, but she had. And she wanted to go back to the park that this situation happened to her and do something in it to say, I've healed, the community hasn't healed, and we need to heal together. And she built a playground. She built a playground in that park that happened to her to say we have to be involved and engaged, and both play matters, but community matters as well. The amazing thing about Wanda is she's gone on to lobby her city to become a Playful City USA, which is a program that's working in partnership with the mayor, the businesses, and other communities to map all the play opportunities in Spartanburg, see what the access and quality is to all people, and then try to improve it. She hasn't stopped there. But what the point is that she's reversing this trend of almost apathy to bring about this level of engagement and excitement that's really exciting. Through all of these stories, though, I think we recognize that play is a luxury, not a necessity. And we as an organization recognize that there's a deficit of play that's existing that's doing harm to our children. I mean, all you have to do is understand that only 1 in 5 kids live within access to a park or a playground, which is a half a mile. 1 in 5 kids. And if we look at the diversity numbers or income numbers, the number is even worse. 52% of school districts across the country have eliminated recess. 52% of school districts have eliminated recess. And kids now are getting somewhere between 7 and 8 hours of screen time a day, video, computer, or monitors. Kids are getting 7.5 hours of screen time a day. And so we know that play is on the decline, but what's going to bring it back? And what we're talking about is we have to create a sense of urgency that all of us as adults, parents, siblings, grandparents recognize the importance of this and see that the best type of play for kids is all types of play for kids. What we don't want to see is that we single track kids at a very young age into a sport or band or music, and all those things are good, but they're not good in balance. And what we want to see and what we're asking people to advocate is for free play, unstructured, the creativity sense, outside. Outside. It's not ironic that Finland is the #1 country in the world for academic performance and achievement. They have a play-based curriculum. Kids get 15 minutes of outdoor play, unstructured, every hour of every day. And they're #1. So we can't say that play is a luxury and that you either play or drill kids. It's through play that kids are building the social skills, their muscular development, and don't even ask me about the childhood obesity statistics, or the creativity that's going to be needed and necessary for them both to have a fun childhood, but also to adapt to an ever-changing world that they're ultimately going to inherit. I read a survey recently that corporate CEOs, when surveyed, said the two most important skills for employees, adaptability and creativity. Because of how rapid change comes, adaptability and creativity. And kids today have less of both. They're not very flexible, and when you look at, so we've been doing this experiment where give a kid an empty box and see how long it takes them to figure out something to do with it. Unfortunately, it's becoming too long. Give a kid a stick. Ask them to do something with it. Can it be more than a stick? Can it be a sword? And that's the type of imaginative, creative exercise and activity that we want to see all kids have. So as leading this organization on this precipice of a 15th birthday, our 2000th build, which will be June 15th, our 1 millionth volunteer, we know that we can't do it alone. And last year, as an organization, we built 181 playgrounds as the model I described. And we got 14,000 requests. So in writing this book, and what I'm asking all of us to think about doing, is what can we do to play a little part, and all of us doing little things, it echoes, ripples, and magnifies our efforts. I also want to say is that Amazon has played an important part in my personal history and that of the organization, inasmuch as on your 10th anniversary, on Amazon's 10th anniversary, they did an innovation contest. And it was one of the first online donation opportunities for nonprofit organizations. They picked 5 organizations. We were one of the organizations that they picked. And for every dollar that the organization raised, Amazon would match it. And the winning organization would get an additional $1 million. Kaboom did not win the additional $1 million. Actually, Donors Choose did. And they're a great organization, and look at what they've been able to do since. What Kaboom did, though, was raise about $35,000, which still got matched by Amazon, so we had $70,000. When Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we got a call from a woman in Connecticut who, when she was 8 years old, remembers her playground in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, when Hurricane Camille came through town, that was destroyed and never rebuilt. And she had this sense of anger about the community that she did not want the same generation of kids to say they never rebuilt the playground. So I write about and talk about in the book this experience of going to Bay St. Louis right after the storms, and on the 100th day after the storm, December 17th, us constructing a playground in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and how powerful that was, and how play and the sense of space and history, shared sense of space and history, became what Bay St. Louis began to rebuild everything else on their town around. And that all happened because of the unrestricted $75,000 contribution we got from Amazon.com. I'm now pleased to report that 2 weeks ago, I was back in New Orleans where we built our 145th playground along the Mississippi, New Orleans Gulf Coast. Every school that's open in New Orleans right now has a Kaboom community-built playground, something that I take a lot of pride in, and that frankly would not have been possible without that innovation contest and for us to be able to do this. So I'm really grateful for Amazon's support of that. 3 things. I end the book with what we can do. And what we're asking people to do is we're launching mobile technology that will enable people to map play opportunities in every community across the country. It'll be live in 2 weeks. And when you're at a playground, a park, a skate park, a ball field, put it on our map, rate it, take a photo of it, because what that's going to help us be able to understand is where the deficit in the deserts actually exist. And we want to know that in particular because of race, income, and county health statistics. The second thing is, after we crowdsource this map very quickly, we need to build and improve better places to play. So we need all of you to get involved, not waiting for Kaboom, but using the online tools in the communities that we've already built for you to go do it yourself, for your community to come together and do it yourself. 2 weeks before Hurricane Katrina, going back to New Orleans for a moment, the superintendent of schools called me and said that they were debating the lunch menu, school lunch menu, and recess. And 600 parents showed up to talk about the lunch menu and had ideas and opinions and thoughts about what should happen with it. 3 parents showed up for recess. And the lesson that I took out of that was both this combination of, do we really understand how important play is? And if we do, who's going to be the one that shows up to make sure that there's consequences to our actions, and get other people to show up so that there's consequences to our actions, so that New Orleans doesn't cut recess like they did, and like the other 52% of school districts across the country. So my point being is that we need to map the state of play. We need to build and improve what's out there. We need to role model ourselves and go out and play, particularly in creativity, unstructured. And then the third thing is we need to show up and be advocates. And if your childhood school, even if you don't have kids anymore, or they're out of school, doesn't have both playgrounds or recess, please do something about it. Be the one that raises your hand and stops the current slide that's going on and brings back play for all kids. Kaboom can't do it alone, which is why we wrote this book, to actually invite and ask you to join with us and for us to go further, faster together. You should also know that 100% of the proceeds of this book goes directly back into Kaboom, the organization, not myself, to actually help us fund and fuel building this movement so that we can go further, faster. So I look forward to taking your questions, having a conversation, and hope that you'll play on. Thank you.